Spooky man.
Good evening and welcome back to Goosebumps HorrorTown playthrough. This is Grim as always here, and tonight we're going to be talking about Event 21, which is a most special time for us ghouls and monsters. That is Halloween, the month of spooks, of scares and more. In a game like HorrorTown, this is probably the better thing than Christmas and more. And the team at Pixowl has decided to craft something very unique. The last two Halloween updates we've had was one of the Haunted Halloween, which was based off of the movie of the same name. The event was actually one of my favorites, and the movie, it alright. It could have been better, but in my own, IMO. But regardless, the last year one was that of the Horrorland. Well, more or less Horror's at Chiller's House, but yeah, Horrorland is more better. It's catchier, right? But, yeah, it was a little bit of a shorter update, but that one was kind of fun, too. And then this time around, they decided to do another big thing. However, I want to mention that this update has been in the works for such a while now. In fact, this has been since April for one particular character, which we'll mention. Now, normally around this time, I'll mention and talk about the teasers that the game has done, but as of late, they haven't been doing that. But besides the in-game stuff, which I'm going to show you right now. The first of which is what I mentioned before in my part 4. If you want to take a look into that, it basically spoils everything there. But Curly mentions something about him getting involved into the game. Now, I did say that he is indeed going to get involved in the game, but I'm not too sure exactly what. Well, you know, at the time you probably already know, but, you know, let's pretend as if we don't. But the other interesting thing is that during our game before the update hit, this weird pop-up hit which says, "Can you hear the creepy noise coming from the crypts?" I think Halloween's almost in HorrorTown. And crypt is an important word there to note, because this is something I'm going to mention way back into April. Remember back in April when I've mentioned that I believe that little area in the middle might have been Curly's house? Well, that is because it is. Because I won't spoil it much more, but Curly has finally gotten himself into town. Hooray! But he's not alone. In fact, he's brought some other people with him, including the book, what this is based off of, tonight's event reveal. Now, normally I would show you the background. However, this art, the background for this art is done really well. So I've decided to kind of do something else instead, to kind of unmask, because I like to do these hidden silhouettes, as it were. And they've done a great job with some of these characters, but I'm stalling as of right now. So you might be saying, Grim, what is this update? Well, that is because this book they've decided to pick for Event 21 is Trick or Trap. Not to be confused with Trick or Trapped, which is another book, but this one is actually based off of the Most Wanted series. In fact, it's one of the 4 special books that seem to have a theme around this one house, but I digress. It's something of the note here, but it's interesting enough. There are some interesting values when it comes to this particular book, especially with its background, right? And more or less, during the showing of a previous book, they decided to show this as the artwork for what would be Trick or Trap. However, that soon changed, as we know, to what we know of now. But I want to talk a bit about this book. It won't be too long because it's nothing too special, but the story of it roughly goes like this. In the book, it follows with a kid named Scott, and he has a friend who's named Menda. And Scott is very much a scaredy cat. In fact, he's been kind of teased about this. Kind of reminds you of someone else, right? Now, he didn't want to be a coward, so he decided he's going to get back at the people who've basically bullied him. And this caused him to kind of go into this creepy abandoned house that everyone's kind of spooked about. So he goes in there, and, you know, whatever. But then he comes across this weird mask, and he decided to take it with him Big mistake, as we know in Goosebumps. So anyways, he wears this mask, and weird things start happening. Like, he starts seeing these weird illusions, like his mom would give him some gross food, but takes the mask off, and it's like, oh, it's normal spaghetti, right? Again, I'm trying to recall, because this has been a while since I've read this book. But interesting enough, there's this weird woman that comes to him, and it's creepy. The only thing that he knows of is the fact that she has one gold tooth. And at first she's like, oh, this must be Aunt whatever, right? But his mom's like, well, she's not here yet. And it's like, okay, then who's this creepy old woman who's been hiding me? Turns out this woman's name is Lillian, and she is the ghost that haunted the house that he took the mask from. In fact, the mask belonged to her, and, shenanigans ensued. Long story short, near the end of this book, he kind of comes back thinking everything's good and golden. However, he notices his friend Amanda having, when she smiled, she had a golden tooth, implying that it probably is Lillian, who hasn't disappeared. Right. Again, the whole thing is not really needed, because, frankly, this whole book isn't really about this. It's mostly about Curly. And this is what I wanted to interest you about, because I'm going to talk to you about the characters that are kind of coming into this fray here, as well as some of the changes. Now, the first thing is, of course, we have our man Curly. Curly is one of the main characters that's coming into this game. He is now going to be a playable character. Finally, our narrator is finally an NPC, is no longer an NPC. He's finally some sort of character we can control. But, like I've mentioned, he is not alone. In this update, he is coming with some of his family. The one family member that a lot of people know of is Drool. And you know of Drool because when Jacobus decided to do Curly as the mascot, as it were, for the short stories, he decided to have a little sidekick with him, and that would be the dog Drool here. However, what's interesting enough is that Drool's name actually ended up becoming, was actually the winner of a name draw for a special newsletter that came when you were subscribed as a book club member. Right, because, again, I guess a lot of young people are going to be watching this and wondering what I'm talking about. Back in the day, there was something when Goosebumps was in its heyday, when it was in its hype. Scholastic made this little book club. So every year you would send them a few bucks, and you get this little care package. In that care package also comes with a newsletter, which is basically like, oh, here's the new books, here's the thing from R.L. Stine, and all that stuff and more. During one of these newsletters, they had a contest where they asked, oh, what would you name this dog? And the answer to that was that of Drool. And it's interesting how they came up with this conclusion, because the way they put it into this, I'll show you the picture here. You can pause and read it if you want. But it's interesting how they decide to say, oh, because it rhymes with cool and ghoul. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. I guess, whatever. And more or less that is something to be said there. So, yeah, Drool is one of the main character walk-arounds. In fact, he's going to be one of the mainstays. And again, I'll talk more about that soon enough, but there are some other characters I want to mention before. Now, there is one character from Trick or Trap that is coming, and that is Lillian. And as you can see, she looks very interesting. When she's in the game, when we finally get into the game, you'll start to see who she really looks like, and oh boy, she looks very, she looks like someone I know, but you'll see more when we get closer to her final reveal, which I will, all that and more. But, again, it's not just Curly, Drool, or Lillian. In fact, there are 3 other characters coming by. In fact, these are Curly's sisters. Now here's where the fun part comes in. You might be wondering, what on earth? I've never heard Curly having sisters before. Well, according to the Goosebumps wiki, which is the #1 when it comes to Goosebumps facts and information, during one of these newsletters, someone asked Curly if he was married to somebody. And Curly said no, he wasn't. However, he had 3 sisters, Skelly, Boo, and Nightshade. This is the only reference to the fact that he has sister. These 3 characters have not been seen in any medium, has not been mentioned in any book, nothing. No pictures, nothing. This is the only thing. It was a throwaway line and a very obscure. Basically, this means that these 3 characters, Curly's sisters, are the most obscure Goosebumps characters that they've decided to bring into the game. And my god, did they give these characters life, and I love them. And when we get to the dialogue for this, you'll see why. And quite frankly, they did a great job when it comes to their whole story and demeanor. But again, I won't spoil too much, but their silhouettes look very enticing, to say the most. Again, it's kind of hard to the imagination because you're seeing this and kind of going, yeah, I kind of wonder what that is too. Before we go ahead and talk about this update, what it comes with, I will mention real quick. They decided to make some updates when it comes to 2 particular characters back in April, that being Trigger and Cuddles. As you can see here, these look like they've been drawn. It's because these are now the official designs for them, because when they were first introduced, they didn't really have a design. They just had their avatar and that was it. So this is now properly there. And what's interesting about them is the fact that the reason why they've done this is because it's going to make sense when we play around with Drool's story, which when we get there, whew. Well, anyways, I think that's basically all I wanted to talk about when it comes to the more interesting stuff, and there's not much facts when it comes to this book, so might as well go ahead and talk about what this event brought us. So let me now read to you the little blurb they have here. Wait a minute. Curly? Is that you? Join HorrorTown's most famous skeleton on his shriek for scares. Will he be able to fit in with the monster community beneath the shadows of his sisters? Find out in this epic, bone-chilling Halloween story. So, like I mentioned before, all these characters are basically here. I won't spoil a lot of stuff here because I think part 1 will share everything about what these characters are about and whatnot, but boy, is it... it's interesting. One thing I will note, though, is the... again, I won't mention a whole lot because I think Crafting 101 is going to mention this, but one thing I want to note is the event currency this time is this, which is an homage to the book's title art, and I thought I loved the fact that it's basically a decapitated zombie arm with the trick-or-treat bag. Just, I love it. I love these little things they do, and it actually is perfect for this kind of deal. I mean, it would probably be a skeleton hand because of the whole curly thing, but you know what? Nah. This book, Trick or Trap, whatever. It's very interesting to kind of talk about here. Now, you might be wondering what has come back, because there is something about with this update that I want to talk about that is pretty unique. As I mentioned before, the last Halloween they brought back the event characters from Haunted Halloween, and they made Sam a part of Mr. Wood's quest line. And I figured, and it turns out that they decided to do something with Sunny, so he's actually a part of this story more so than anything else. Curious choice, I will say. But that's not the interesting part, because he's not alone. You might be curious on what special book they decide to pick for this update. Well, the Mad Lads did it, because the next book that they've introduced to this game is Haunted Halloween. Yes, a book that is not based off a book, but a movie. How did they do it, those Mad Lads? But hey, you know what? I'm not complaining. That made it very like great. I love it because now I get to replay and do that whole thing. My favorite update. I get to have it justice by actually saying things properly instead of me kind of mumbling about as I did back in the day. So we're finally going to get some of those memes going on as soon as I get to that point. But we still have to deal with the vampires, and that's been taking a while. But that's about it. There's not much left here to talk about because I think the majority of it seems to be pretty much clear as day. And quite frankly, I figured the artwork for this is going to be really, really good. And I won't spoil it just yet. I'll show you it in part 1. So until then, I'm Grim, and I'll be seeing you in part 1 to Trick or Trap. Until then, stay spooky.